what comes after world domination. Yes, that's me. I'm Daniel. I work for Wolf SSL. That's my office. That's my website. So, as said, I did open source for several years before I started a project that I then renamed into curl in 1998. I renamed it to curl actually 1 month after the term open source was sort of established, and open source, the initiative and everything was founded earlier that year, 1998. It's fun because then it means me and my journey with curl has sort of coincided with open source in general. I started curl as a little hobby project because I wanted some HTTP stuff downloaded every now and then it took off and became something much more than I had anticipated ever, of course. Nowadays I do curl full time. Fun journey, open source story. And of course, these days, we're talking about software as in it's really eating the world. Everything is software these days. Everything is smart. Smart meaning there's software in it, right? There's a CPU or something in it. And nowadays, pretty much everything is going to have software or be smart. And if it isn't smart already, it will be smart next year, right? Pretty much everything that you can imagine in your surrounding is going to be smart. And running software, what does it mean to run software? It means that there's a lot of open source in it. In this survey from Linux Foundation, the respondents said, well, 96% of the code bases have some open source in them. Basically, everything has open source, right? We're everywhere already. And when I say open source here now, of course, I include free software. I don't want to have that discussion. Open source, free software. I once introduced RMS on stage, and then I explained the organization name in Stockholm, FOSS Stockholm. And I mentioned that it's called free and open source software, and he interrupted me immediately to tell me about it should be free software. But anyway, I don't care. I talk about them interchangeably. I'm going to use the term open source today because that's me. And so we started in 1998. We coined the term open source in 1998, and before that, of course, we already did open source. We just didn't call it open source, but the concept existed. Free software existed before that, and we actually did sort of free software even before that term was coined. Right? We shipped source code and allowed others to use it. And from 1998 until today, a lot of people know about open source now. Pretty much everyone does, right? Even normies on the street actually know something about open source. They know that open source exists. They might not really know exactly what it is, but ask the people around you. They actually know about the concept, or that there is a concept at least. And again, pretty much everyone now uses open source. Everyone who's a developer works in engineering somehow. We're all using open source and work with open source. So, as I said, 96% of the code bases have open source in them. So we're all using open source in whatever product or whatever development we do. There is open source everywhere, a lot of it, and a lot more contributors. Right? When I started my journey in mid-1990s, there was sort of a fringe movement, few weirdos who ever sort of contributed to open source. These days, it's quite natural. A lot of people, and I imagine that at least almost everyone in this room has contributed, and will contribute a lot more going forward. So it's not a weird concept. That's just how we do software, and that's how we run the world now. And a lot of them also maintain open source. It's not just something a few oddballs do. That's something pretty much all of us do, or at least a large percentage of us maintain software open source these days. So all of this means that basically this is how we do software these days. Someone writes a little thing on top, and then we have 22 different components, and they're all open source, and we add something. Sometimes that top logic thing is not open source, it's a proprietary thing, and you try to sell that for a lot of money. Sometimes that is open as well, right? But that's sort of, this is how everything is done these days. Or, as I like to view it, more like this. It's all open source, 96% of it. And then we have something on top that might not be open source. So everything is open source, to some degree. This is a slide I typically show the devices that actually run curl, but I just changed it suddenly. Yes, a lot of open source, it's everything. Big volume stuff, proprietary, big tech, everything. You know, medicine, surroundings, kitchen, outdoors, everything runs open source. There was this paper from last year from Harvard Business School. They estimate that the total value of all open source in the world last year, $8.8 trillion US in value, in the value sort of from the, well, doesn't matter. So a lot of value. We have created something huge, right? And this total value comes from these components, the number of components that come from this ecosystem side. So yeah, there are now 10 million open source packages, and we're talking about 1.6 million developers who are actually contributing to open source. We're a big bunch, we're doing a lot of things, and we produce a lot of value, right? And nowadays then, so yeah, open is quite often the default. Now when we ship things, we build things, we do things, it's open to a large degree. And we even do open hardware, right? We have open down to chip level, we have circuits, we have a lot of things are open these days. Not everything, I mean, I think hardware-wise we're sort of still a little bit behind in how much is open, but we're certainly going in that direction, and more stuff is open and it's going to become open. So it's certainly an open world. And I also just want to sort of take the opportunity to say that open source, being the one who I am, so I'm running a project that is fairly well used, right? So 20 billion installations is kind of fun. And a lot of people then come ask me questions about open source and blah, blah. And I often try to emphasize this point that it's there's not a single open source community, right? It's not like, here's the group of open source people, and they are not open source people, because we are all pretty much open source people to various degrees. That means that we're a very heterogeneous kind of group or environment. So sort of, we're all just different shades of gray. Or you're in or out of a project. People tend to ask me sort of, how many people are involved in your project? I don't know. How do you know? You're in or out. We're all in or out, or sort of at the same time, in every project pretty much, that we ever contributed to. That means that it's hard to define what we are we in or out, and it doesn't matter, and it's good. We're just different, right? And I also, these days, want to emphasize that we're not foundations. I'm sure we have foundations, right? There's a Linux foundation, there's a different Apache foundation, there's a Python foundation, yeah. And there are several foundations, but they make about these many projects in a world that is this big. We're all independent. We're all different, actually. And that's good. And that's given me an excellent opportunity to show this picture. I'm not, right? So that is where we are, where we've come from, and we're moving ahead. But yeah, have we really won? I call this sort of world domination, because we are everywhere, right? We have done open source, we do open source is everywhere, but there's more to it, right? What's coming next? So I suggest that everything can, of course, still be improved. We still have a lot of distance to go to perfect everything. Sure, we've come this far, but we need to iterate, we need to fix things. Things can be improved. I started my little project 28 years ago, and I've counted every bug fix we've landed in curl since then. And you can start and you can go on, and there's never any end to the bugs, right? Wherever you fix something, you add a new bug, and you can fix the bug, and then you add. So we keep fixing things. We iterate. The way we do open source, right? We keep iterating. We never stop. We just fix things and do a new release, and that's exactly how we're going to continue to do things, right? Security-wise, we are not really in a good state, I would say, in general when it comes to software. And looking at these, this is the number of CVEs reported over the last few years. As we can see, we are the orange part here shows number of CVEs reported, registered, published last year. So shortly boosted like 25% only last year. So we're suddenly hitting through the roof here. A lot of new CVs, and why is that? And just looking forward, the projected number of CVs we're going to see this year, based on how many we've seen so far this year, we're going to hit the sort of new record levels. And I suspect that we're only seeing the beginning of this. We're going to shoot through this a lot faster going forward, because we're suddenly paying more attention to problems, we're reporting more bugs, we're finding more things, people are taking things more seriously. That means that we're going to see a lot more CVs going forward. When I work with people talking about CVs, I try to tell them that this is just the beginning, right? We're going to move into a world when we need to be able to manage a lot more CVs. We cannot just deal with CVs one by one anymore, because the volume is so intense. We're talking hundreds of CVs per day on average. So basically, I stipulate that this is sometimes called the Linus law. Sort of given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, which might be true, right? If you have 1,000 people watch your code, maybe those 1,000 people will actually find all the bugs. And the only thing is that you never know if you actually had anyone to watch your. Sure, you release things open source, right? But how do you know that anyone actually cared about it or read your code? Usually they haven't. I can say that I have my software in 20 billion installations, but how many have actually read my code and verified that it actually works? Very few. Most people just assume that someone else did it, and most people are wrong. So I stipulate that we're going to, of course, work on this more. We're going to get more people to view your code. That's a good thing, but we should not just assume that others have done it, because that's not the reality. And of course, one of the things that people always throw at me, because I don't use memory-safe languages, is why don't you? But I really think that the future is certainly going to involve more memory-safe languages and less memory-unsafe languages, because we need to start thinking about where we're going security-wise. And security-wise then also means things like taking responsibility for what ends up in products. So what is going to affect us a lot going forward is, of course, the EU legislation for CRA that Ola is going to educate you all about tomorrow. And it's about taking responsibility for what we ship, and really what everyone ships, because so far up today, I mean, we're 27 years from coining the term open source, but we're all shipping, and when I say we all, maybe not I, but a lot of companies, products out there, they bundle a lot of open source without caring about the source or what it is. Actually, they ship a lot of products. The products are cheap. They rather sell a new product next year than having a good product. So they ship whatever crap they can. But that's not going to hold going into the future. We're going to have to make sure that we actually ship good stuff. So ideally, hopefully, this will make money and efforts trickle down into the open source projects to make sure that we make better products that then can be used in all of these things. My wishful thinking for doing better products and better security here also that we will get better lifetimes out of products, because we cannot just tell the customers, well, buy the next one in 2 years when this doesn't work anymore because it's full of security holes, because that's not going to be a viable business anymore. And that then leads into, sure, we need to find more ways to have sustainable finances in open source. these 10 million open source packages, I mean, how many of these packages are actually getting any funding at all, or funding to a sufficient amount, or just some funding? That's just a tiny fraction of all open source, and most, I shouldn't say most, many projects at least sort of struggle with this. How do I actually finance this? How can we make this? So I'm really hoping for and looking forward a future in the world where we find new ways to pay developers who are actually doing the things that we need, that we build our society on, the infrastructure that we all use and need. And of course, this then also needs to take the number of maintainers, or make sure that we can maintain all these 1.6 million developers in 10 million packages. That's a lot of packages for not that many developers. And of course, we need more maintainers helping out in all these projects. It's just a little over a year, right, since the utils attack. And the question for us all is really, how do you handle when GIATAN joins your project, right? We should all have one GIATAN in our project. It's because that guy, I assume it's actually a guy, I mean, it's a fictional person, right? It doesn't really matter, but that was a very productive contributor in the project. Apparently, that person did a lot of good, and some bad, but you know. Aren't we all like that? Really? A lot of good, a lot of some bad. So we should all pay attention to this and just all be aware that we all have one of these GIATANs in our project, or potential GIATANs in our projects, and we should be able to manage that. Get all the good out of it and detect the bad. And that's sort of how we move forward. These guys are still going to continue to exist and try to do things as they did with XEUtils. That's surely it's not going to be an isolated event. It's going to happen again, or maybe it's already happening somewhere. We just need to make sure that we can deal with it. Who cares? The bad stuff we don't accept, we get the good stuff. I mean, this guy, or the team behind it, I mean, they did good stuff in the XEUtils project for years before they landed the really terrible stuff. So they could have gotten a lot of good things out of it. According to the same study then, 96% of the value comes from the top 5% of the developers. So again, that just shows the weird skew of the ecosystem, right? So there's 5% of developers, possibly also from projects that are actually doing a lot of good for all of them. Or there are a lot of companies extracting and doing a lot of profits out of us, out of those top 5, or at least all of them actually, all of us. And still, we go back to this number, right? The median number of maintainers in an open source project. It is 1, and it will remain 1 for a long time, right? Because most projects actually just have 1 maintainer. It's a little bit sad, or good, depending on what you want. In a lot of projects, that's good, right? You don't have your spare time filled, you want to do something, you should get, yeah, that's fine. In a lot of projects, that's not so fine, because you struggle with your daily life, getting things done, work, family, blah, blah, blah. And it's easy to get a project started, sometimes harder to get it going and keep going, and people are asking for things, companies show up and want things, blah, 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 CRA, you have to, what's the requirements for your project, you actually. So, yes, we need more maintainers, and we need to make sure that, I mean, in an ideal world, we would, rather than maintain our own wall, everyone has their own single projects, maybe we could share them a little bit more, help out each other more. And of course, I couldn't talk about this without showing 2347, but, and of course, that person in Nebraska, that's a lot of different persons, right? I'm pretty much, this image is, of course, it's a brilliant image, and it's been shown in millions of different contexts, and they're always referring to someone different, who that particular person in Nebraska is. And of course, we should all strive towards making sure that We don't have that single person in Nebraska. We want to make sure that we sort of convert everything into a solid ground that we can stand on. It doesn't really matter if one person goes away. We should make a solid foundation for where we're going. To do that, I think, one area where we're particularly bad, I am bad, I'm judging by this room, I think we're all bad, is I say that we're heterogeneous, sort of, we're all different, but we're not different enough. We're certainly not different enough. We're too common. And when I say that we're not different enough is that too many of the open source world, too much of the open source world is like me. Old, white man from the Western world, right? Where are all the youngs and where are the sort of minorities in your project, in my projects? Not too well represented. And I think we really need to make sure that we give that a focus going forward, because we cannot keep having the average age of everyone increase by 1 year every year, because it's not going to be sustainable. What's going to happen we're all growing older, so we need to get new blood, and we need diversity, and we need all the different views and aspects on things, not just old white men like me, because that's going to make things bad in the long run. And when I did a quick poll on Mastodon about what people actually foresee the problems or challenges for open source going forward, the next 10 years. What's really hard for us to do? What do we need to solve? We already have open source everywhere, but what's the problem next? And so many people responded. Yeah, some former friends in the world, the allies we thought we had yesterday, they're not our allies maybe anymore, because suddenly someone turns around and stabs you in the back. And how vulnerable are we as a society ecosystem? How much do we depend on one country suddenly going Russia on us? So that's certainly something just to keep in mind. And with that in mind, then sort of, for example, where is the hosting of your projects? Where is the infrastructure? Where are the foundations that I just said aren't that important, but they're still present? And where are most of the open source related foundations in the world? In which country do they often come from? And where some amount of the contributors. I don't have the answers, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is a problem right now. I'm saying that this is a concern that I hear being voiced from a lot of sources, because suddenly the world is not at all as it was just months ago. Related, or maybe not related, but at least tangentially related, is another subject. There's a particular AI track here, and if you've heard anything from me about AI in the past, it's very positive, and it's not going to be too positive now either, because AI is, of course, all the rage these days. None of us can avoid it, and a lot of us are using it to some degree in various ways. I try not to. But we certainly have a lot of questions to answer that remain sort of to work with for us when it comes to open source. Just a basic question, for example, is it okay in general? The licensing thing, what exactly is it producing? Can we use it? It's not really a new question, right? People were copying from Stack Overflow before, now it's just copying from another source, but it's still the question of copyright, for example, ownership, license, blah, blah. And recently we have these problems that the AI monsters of the world are also overloading so much of the capacity of usually open source related projects, right? If you are self-hosting your open source project, for example, do you appreciate getting hammered 1 billion times a day from an AI scraper bot that doesn't sort of recognize or is responsible by reading log.txt, for example? So we certainly have a huge problem just infrastructure-wise. And not only that, sort of the AI bots are just hogging down your site so you can't even make it run. It also gets really expensive for you because you suddenly ramp up your bandwidth builds by this intense sort of almost attacks. I certainly see this on the curl website, so these sometimes have some ridiculous amounts of traffic, so that is totally unexplained by any other means than this kind of nonsense. And I'm done, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to try to insert power. If I find something. Sorry about that. So, and talking about AI, I think it also is a question for us all how to use it. Does it actually contribute, or does it dilute the value of open source in general and the contributions? And I also suspect that there's going to be just pause, breathe, take a moment, talk to your neighbor, and now I'm going to see if I can. So Chrome is not my default browser, because I don't want it to be my default browser, but I can use it for this. Okay, pretend that didn't happen. This is a test if I can deliver something and still keep cool while sort of messing around. Right? So, fast repeat what I said, blah, 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 open, different, security, and blah, 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 and into AI. So, yeah. AI is going to serve us more challenges going forward, and I think we're only in the beginning of this, and there's going to be a lot of open source related challenges when it comes to adapting to a world when everyone is going to use AI, whether we want it or not, and so that we cannot. It's not a question for us if we can use it or avoid it, it's just a question how to adapt to it. I certainly feel that we're going into an area with the lowest point here, that it makes us lazy and dumb because people are now already, and I think, as I said, I think we're already in the beginning of this, but I think that people are already asking the AIs to solve their problems already far more than they should. It's not necessarily bad all the time, but it certainly makes us lazy, and that sort of ends up with stupidity. And I see this, so I said that I'm certainly mostly negative about AI because people are using it in very lazy and dumb ways. For example, I get a lot of security reports by people who actually just, copy code from curl into some of these engines and ask, find me a problem, and it'll find them a problem, and then they will just copy that answer and email me about it. I found a problem, fix it, and it's really bad because it told me it's really bad. And not so far, they've never been right. It's just the one who actually asked the AI, they have no idea what it actually asked about. The AI said something, and they didn't really understand the answer either, but they reported it as a really serious error. It could you know, the sky will fall soon, but they have no idea what the AI actually said, or the AI was sometimes completely wrong, sometimes just slightly wrong, but still, often just, and that's just an overload. Again, of the maintainers, why do they do this? It doesn't help anyone. In my case, I guess they're trying to get the reward money, but it's still silly, it's lazy and dumb. And going back to their allies and friendly people, or formerly friends, where's the open source hosting these days? There's a fair amount of monoculture when it comes to open source hosting providers, and I mean, I'm certainly one of them using the primary one, and a lot of us are, but we can certainly have that in mind going forward. Sort of, it certainly hampers innovation, and it's problematic for at least some nations, nationals from some nations, to participate in open source. It is certainly making it harder to be this diverse universe that we want it to be. And it's really not open source either. So by going with the big proprietary providers, we're not helping open source either. So we should just, going into the future, I understand that we're all sort of, the development of software in general tends to be, in the beginning we have a lot of choices and everything flourishes, and then we can go into fewer selections because out of just how market economy and everything works. But still, we need to remember this. And again, what will happen when you get cut off from this, because they will no longer be our friends. We need to just be aware. One of these things that going back to security and how we're going to do things better in the future, that I hope that we're going to do things better, is fixing so many of the package manager things that keep on happening, right? Why do we have package managers that lets you typo squad or register new projects or take over someone else's and infect systems all over the globe? It keeps on happening. And I'm sure it will keep on happening. And I mean, sure, we all do mistakes, everyone does, but we need to make it more resilient. We need to sort of just tighten up the infrastructure for everything. And another thing that I think, you got to see this when I rebooted my machine and started Chrome, and I said, yeah, I don't like using Chrome. I use it for this because this is a Google slide, so I use Chrome for that because it works better in Chrome. And that brings me to this idea. How many browsers do we have these days? We might have about 2, or 1.5 or something. But it's certainly not good for the open source. It's not good for anything. It's certainly not good for open source. It's not good for the universe. It's not good for anything. And my hope for the future is that, and this is one of the biggest problems I think that we have in software in general right now, because it's certainly not something anyone in here can do anything about easily, and pretty much, I don't know what it takes to bring this sad development in that everyone is going to be using a single browser engine going forward, controlled by one powerful entity that is not on our side, as in the open source world. But okay, so we've won already. We did a lot of things. There are some things to work on, and I think for the future, there's going to be more open source, of course, because we've understood it. We're only 27 years in. A lot of people have not contributed to open source yet. We have a lot more people adding. We have a lot of different ideas. Open is now the default, so I think we're just we're still accelerating. There's going to be much more open source going forward. Much more code in general everywhere, and much more code everywhere, but we're not accelerating the number of developers as fast as we could, so we're going to have an interesting time with more code, the same amount of developers, everything open. And we need them to be more resilient, and it needs to be done properly, right? We need to pay attention to security, and we need to do that. I mean, there's going to be laws that is going to make sure that we also think about it more. And we need to make sure that we are more diverse and get everyone else involved too, that are not exactly identical copies of ourselves already in here. And we need it to be better funded. We need to make sure that the money trickles down better to the ones who are actually in need of, and or one for it. And a fun thing then, because I showed you this data about the total value of the open source that we figured out at Harvard last year. And then the value, is 96% of the value is at the top 5% of developers. That means that the average value of the top OSS developers is about $105 million per person. Just a fun number. I show you this mostly because it shows the value, it shows the potential. I'm sure no one is going to get this money just for doing open source in general, but it shows that there's a huge value and potential in doing it this way. And it's in our interest to make sure that we make better use of it, that make everyone aware of it, and that we make sure that money is being distributed better into the ecosystem. And there's this fun thing. So I'm focusing on a lot of things. I've mentioned these, where are the young ones, and we need a better diversity. And to end this little presentation in a little higher note, I wanted to show you one of my best emails. I receive a lot of funny emails, I should just say. And that's fun. But one of the best emails I received in recent times actually came from this 11-year-old kid that I think sort of gives us hope for the future. Well, this is the person you want in your open source project, right? I wish I had that when I was there. So I think, it gives me so much hope, right? Not only that the person is actually 11 years old and is using my product, but is actually emailing me about it and wants help and, going to open source and everything. So ideally, that's the spirit, that's the kids we want to see in our projects more and going forward. So I think, with all this, I think we can make the future really bright, and I think pretty much what I've showed you before, the numbers going up from 1998 and so on, I think we can keep them going up in all those different aspects from here on and into the future. So I'm an optimist. I think we're going to make this really, really good future too. Thank you.
Folks, we can take some questions.
I can take some questions. And I have this slide here to remind me that I also have stickers if someone wants stickers, but they forgot the cards. There's someone over there. You will need a mic run.
Yeah, just shout.
Yeah, I'll shout.
Okay.
Go for it.
And do you have a policy on acceptable versus not acceptable use of AI as a large language model, coding tools for contributions into the curve?
That was my question.
If I have a policy for AI contributions into LibCurve.
You said AI patches.
We don't have any explicit mention of it, so I tend to view patches as if they come from the person who contributed. It doesn't really matter to me how they did it. And so, no, we don't have a policy, so I accept whatever patch you provide that helps the project forward. So I don't actually even usually ask how they did it, because my experience is that it's really hard to make good use of AI to actually contribute to curl, so I think it's still a rare thing. So, no. And I assume that people who are, so that we have that expressed, by contributing to curl, you imply or you agree that you have the right to contribute this code to the project. That also means that you have not copied this from your company's internal source code and are leaking proprietary stuff to me or whatever. So therefore I also, by contributing, you say to me that you have the right to contribute this, and therefore the code should be okay. There are some assumptions in this, and might be a question to sort of maybe reconsider that into the future, but right now that's how we do it, and it works really well, and it has been a pretty good concept for a long time.
on. There we go. Wonderful talk, thank you. You commented a bit on browser monoculture, and I just wanted to play advocate for the devil for a second, just to have fun with everyone here. You have a bit of a operating system monoculture. Everybody's perfectly fine with having one Linux. On the other hand, we have two desktops, or well, 5 or 10 these days, that are all killing each other, and none of them are really doing a very good job. I mean, good enough to use for us nerds, but I mean, world domination is very far away. And a lot of people have argued, to me at least, that if KDNL would have been one project, then Microsoft wouldn't be anywhere near as big as it is today. Been debated for a long time. What are your feelings on that point?
A good point. I think there's a monoculture in a lot of areas when it comes to open source, I think, when there's basically one leading project. But I think the primary difference here is who's in control of it, and what's the sort of, why is someone implementing something into this single browser, for example. So I think it's quite a stretch to compare Chrome to the Linux kernel, for example, or KDE and GNOME, and comparing those sort of, if we call them monocultures, let's agree that we say that, and it's a completely different thing than comparing to a huge tech sort of giant that is sort of just trying to sell us ads. So I think, yes, we might have a little bit of that in many other areas, but I think when it comes to open source, we can always just fork it and start anew if we want to. And if one of those projects that is existing and it goes bad, we fork it and we continue with the fork. That's how it works, right? And there's nothing that can prevent us from doing that. It's a different thing in the proprietary world with big giants.
So you mentioned that if you ask around people on the street, they will at least know what open source is about. But I remember a report from a couple of years ago where OpenSUSE asked the Swedish parties, political parties, about their opinion on open source. Nobody answered the question. Some answered about open data. And how do you think we should move forward as a society on these aspects?
Oh, well, we still have a lot of education and pushing sort of awareness for open source, especially when it comes to governments and laws and everything. So it was certainly not done or sort of even close to done when it comes to that. And when I said that people are aware and know about open source, they certainly mostly just know that there's a term called open source. I don't think most people actually know what it means to actually work open source, or who's paying for it and how does it actually work, and stuff like that. So I think we have a lot of them, we as in everyone, and even it's not even in our, it's not only that it's in our interest to make sure that they understand, it's in their interest to understand, to make sure that they understand open source, right? Because again, open source is the digital infrastructure of the world. If you don't understand what you're standing on and what's running the world, how can we make the correct decisions? How can you make things right if you don't understand the world, right? And the world is open source.
It's a great talk. I was curious about the US dominance of current open source projects. Do you have any stats on that? Let's say, for instance, that in this whole new concept of zero-sum games that seems to have risen in popularity, that it became illegal for US people to contribute to open source because it's ripping off the US.
No, I don't have any stats on that. I actually tried to find it. I don't know any I don't think there's a dominance. In many projects that I am involved with, the dominance is European. So I think it depends on which projects you're in. And so I'm not aware of any good stats on that. And it's hard also to know exactly what is right and wrong there. Where are people from? I have that struggle a lot, right, when people contribute, who are you? A lot of people are just hiding who they are and where they're from, and user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at GitHub, where are they from? I have no idea, I don't know. So I think it's a tough question. We would have to have that surveyed, but I don't know how. How would we know? So, a large amount of developers are US-based, that's for sure. So if we would run into legislation problems like that, like we see in other areas from the US, we're up for some fun challenges. But I don't think it's going to be a stopper, because I think we have a huge amount of open source development outside of the US.
Yeah, and Anecdata would agree with that point. For example, Debian has a bunch of European factions, but not really a strong North American faction. Also, perhaps one of the largest software developers in the world, Intel, has a lot of companies and software produced in Europe. So Europe, I think, is kind of a stronghold, certainly for free software and open source. The United States may produce more software overall, but a lot of that gets consumed in terms of SaaS. SaaS is a big problem, I think. Who's next?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned the revenue stream to the projects. For example, on the commercial side, when we are selling as a service provider or a software provider, we have really hard to convince the end customer for an OEM, for example, to pay for this. Could I pick your brain how to work with this, with the end customer? How should we make money off open software, and how should it trickle down to the responsible engineers in the open source projects?
I wish I had a really good answer to that. That's one of the challenges in my day-to-day. So yeah. So I said I work on curl full-time. Curl is also MIT licensed, so I give it away totally free. And I have customers pretty much every day who say to me, why should they pay? It already works. It has worked for 20 years. Why should they pay me? So they don't. So that's certainly a struggle. I have a little bit of faith in the future, just on the legislative side, that we're going to put high demands on everyone who's actually shipping things, that they need to have quality. And by making sure that everyone ships quality, CRA style, they need to sort of make sure that they're standing on the correct shoulders and that they're sort of reliable open source components. And in order to stand on and use reliable open source components, they actually need to make sure of that somehow. And that hopefully will at least in many sort of circumstances, mean that they need to either pay money or contribute with manpower development in open source projects. So I hope a little bit that sanity will sort of help out open source projects to some degree. But if I had answers to that question, I would be in a much better position with this. So I don't think anyone has any good answers to how we're going to solve all those problems. And I think one of the challenges with money and funding of open source projects in general is that we're all so different. So there's so many different open source projects with different people. So every one of us is sure, we maintain a bunch of different projects. How would you accept money or get new stuff for your project? It's really hard in general. How do you suddenly get money? Or how do you increase efforts into your project just because someone wants you to? It's not that easy. Everyone has a life, we have work, hard to just accept a lot of money. There's taxes, there's bureaucracy, there's, difficult. So there are so many different challenges in funding and sustainability when it comes to that. So we certainly have a lot to work on.
Okay, we still have some time left. 8 minutes. No more questions.
Hi, I want to ask about open source usability, specifically because I have a little bit of an experience around curl in that regard, in that I use HTTP. So you're probably aware that there's this competitor product, and I assume that technology-wise that curl is much more mature than HTTP. but HTTP gives me colorful output, and I like that. But like that kind of problem that I often observe with like open source stuff is like it's like technologically it's very beautiful, but then like what I care about is like how easy is it for me to use. Can I just like quickly input something, or do I have to like research how to use like certain arguments on the command line? I feel like that's like a big weakness for open source software, and specifically also something that I just use for Perl is like when I use it, it's I have to do a lot of research on how to actually use it properly. And so I was just wondering like what your thoughts are about it, like what are your thoughts about the HTTP project, and how are you going forward with usability?
Well, it's a multifaceted question. So, first, of course, I mean, how do you make something usable? It's difficult. And of course, how we all have different ideas of what something should do and should not do. So I get that HTTP question a lot because it's an HTTP command line tool, and curl can be seen as HTTP command line tool. And I think, in my view, it's not an HTTP command line tool, it's an URL transfer tool, and that's where the sort of challenges come in. It's easy, and pretty much whenever you, 20 years later, you make a copy and you make it use 5% of whatever something else do, you can do it in a different way, and you can take advantage of experiences and lessons done elsewhere, and you do something new. It's much harder when you have something and you want it to remain working the same way as it has always done for 20 years and keep that running exactly as it did in the past, so that you can keep on upgrading everything forever and ever. So that's some completely different set of requirements and ideas behind it, so it's not even funny to start the discussion. So it's like, is it hard to make a car engine work, or is it like the toy car can look really nice? Yeah, but it's not really quite the same thing, right? And then I think when it comes to usability in open source, it's often sort of brought up that open source is hard to use and stuff like that. And I think in many times that might be because open source is often done by engineers because we think it's fun and the technical challenge is interesting, and how hard can it be, spirit, let's fix it, and maybe not that's focused good at doing usability or fancy things, or even, you know, figuring out which two colors that go good next to each other. So maybe it's a little bit of that, and sometimes, yeah, I think there are a lot of different explanations. And then back again to monoculture and having diverse things, we should celebrate that there are alternatives. If you don't like alternative A, it's excellent that someone makes alternative B. And if everyone thinks alternative B is better, we should all use alternative B until alternative C shows up, and then we go with that. Or we make D ourselves and use that. That's the spirit of open source, right? So, in one way, it's good. It's good that it works like this, because then we can go and we can pick what we like and not have a single solution for everyone, because that's not what we like.
Okay, we still have about 3 minutes left. So one last question.
Thank you. Great talk. Moving from what was mentioned about usability and AI, and you mentioning how you're somewhat of not an optimist, do you feel like from where open source has came from and what brought that necessity to where the world is going now, where a lot of people assume that code is somewhat commoditized, what do you think the future of open source looks like? Do you feel like there's a cultural revolution that needs to detach itself from strong technical problems towards usability, maybe?
Well, judging from what we have done so far, it's been pretty good. We've been pretty successful in just doing exactly the way we have done. So the question is, are we going to have to change things to make it even better into the future. And maybe we will, and I think maybe it'll come automatically just because the surrounding changes all the time. And since we sort of, open source penetrates even more into everything, so I think even usability and UI things will also be more open source. So I think it will be more open source in every aspect. That's my sort of guess. Possibly AI could, I mean, the worst possible outcome is that, so everyone will just use the existing open source as training for LLMs, and then no one else will do any more open source because now they can all just make their own things proprietary based on training of our code. But I don't think that will happen, because I think that open source has come this far because of a reason, because it's good to stand on common ground. It's good to keep reusing existing solutions, build on that, iterate, move on over and over and over into the future. And that's not going away. So it's still going to be a good idea to build things open source. Possibly still by spicing it up with some proprietary on top, like I showed you with this Stenberg thing. But the concept of open source is still as sound, or even sounder now than ever before. So I don't see any less open source in the future.
Excellent. What a positive note to end the talk on. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.